I'm really interested in this position. At different points in time in the conversation, we've talked about the inability to get people inside the district to do certain things, for kids. And I assume that part of that is the lack of leverage. So as you know, one part of this whole charter school voucher strategy is trying to provide leverage. But if you have a whole harmless provision in this, how does the leverage happen? Or do you think that leverage is important, or is that fiction, or what do you think?
I don't know that I think the leverage is that is fiction. I do think, however, that it's somewhere in the mix between whole harmless and the leverage issue lies support of the mainstream of school people. And that let's face it here, when Wisconsin wanted to be part of the settlement on the voluntary deseg case here with the suburbs, they double dipped everybody on the state aid, right? I mean, so the 25 suburbs, the 26 suburbs in Milwaukee got to pay off. Try something new. Settle your differences. We're going to give you some money to do that. Well, whether or not we like the settlement agreement at all, it allowed some breathing room for people to begin to have some conversations about what education should look like for children in these 27 school districts. It just seems to me that now we're in a what my colleagues would call a penalty phase. That there's no attempt to engage you in participating in this experiment. The penalty is we're going to take your money until you learn your lesson, and then you learn your lesson, we'll see what happens, because you are so bad and so opposed to charters, let's say, that we're not even going to have a conversation with you. Now, in some places that's not true. In California, you got to go through the board and all those types of issues. I'm just trying to find a way, Howard, I guess, to engage more people in the conversation about the redesign of school systems and the provision for varying approaches to the education of young people, rather than to hold them at arm's distance the entire time. Now, I don't think the beat them until they improve strategy has worked. I mean, we've been in that mode since the early 80s, and I don't think that that's worked. I mean, hire this, hire that, state takeovers, and all of that. I don't think it's substantively given people the capacity to change. Perhaps working with colleagues on the design of learning environments would give people the capacity to change. Now, whether that's hold harmless or a phasing of money to follow the kids, or whether that's giving you state aid so that you can create these new vehicles for that, I don't know. But it seems to me that many people are being kept at arm's length because of the money factor. And then there are people who are being kept because they're just opposed to lots of issues. I mean, I know people in this issue is very different in the South. This voucher charter issue, it's very different in the South. It's seen as resegregation, the creation of segregation academies. And so you've got people who are concerned for that reason, and I don't know how, they've got good reason to be concerned. Right. So we've got that. So you've got money, you've got, in part of the country, you've got segregation, part of the country, you have something else. How do we get past those things so that people can sit around this table and say, well, suppose I did have to accommodate homeschoolers, charter schoolers, voucher kids, and mainstream kids who come. What would my school system look like? What would be the incentives for me to participate in that conversation and in that redesign?
The reason why I'm asking it is because I think there's a lot of important issues that you raised in there. But if you're in a city like Milwaukee, where you have a teachers union who has historically, for all of the rhetoric, blocked really any real efforts to make significant improvement. And it's at least my perception that the only thing they really understand is the power equation. And a critical part of the power equation is the control of the resources in the district. And if you change the capacity to who controls those resources as a shot over the bow, would that give a superintendent who wanted to, for example, leverage inside the system to begin to talk about change? If that never occurs, what is it that would give them leverage inside, or people who really want to make change inside the district? So
One of them is changing the collective bargaining.
right, but I'm saying, but
See,
what
it's
I'm
gonna form a sense of urgency. What is missing in this whole is a sense of urgency.
Right.
And I think where you're coming from,
Yeah, I hear
if
you.
we gonna hold them harmless,
I hear you.
you're not going. It's no sense of urgency.
right,
And
So-
some people,
because there's no loss.
It's no loss.
See, because
and
my
some-
argument,
some
is-
unions will not even respond to losing the money.
And see, here's the
They
thing.
would say it's okay. Then
No, I-
some about
no, I understood.
See,
I
here's what one of my
understood
board
where
members said, and it made sense. He said, we are going to have to, the employees or the teachers in Dayton will have to feel the impact first before they react. Let startup charters come. Let startup charters come. Since they don't want to go this route, let startup charters come in here. And then they're going to have to feel the impact in this community. Then that's going to create a sense of urgency. And I believe that that will change the thinking process of the internal environment that's fighting this agenda. Because right now, why change?
Right.
Everything in the contract will protect them. Seniority prevails, so you lose your future of public education, your young teachers. You have to lay them off. But then when you start hitting, then they find out that it's going to impact a retirement, because you have less people paying into the retirement system of the, they'll feel it. Might not happen in 1 year, 2 years, but it's going to happen. And I
Well,
sort of
we've
agree.
now been at vouchers in Milwaukee for 8 years. It hasn't changed teachers union.
no, but see,
It's too small.
it's too small.
It's
State of
too small.
Wisconsin.
First of all,
Let me- let me-
as we all know, first of all, from the very beginning, it was capped.
Right.
It
But that
didn't
cap
have
was raised.
enough money. Yeah, but it's still only, it's now at 1.5%. But even, you got caps and then you got capacity.
Right.
Which is, and frankly, without the parochial schools,
You have no
you'll never have the
capacity.
capacity, at least or it'll be very, very difficult to get to a capacity question. Or if you keep the possibility of for-profits out of this, what you're doing is basically setting up a rope-a-dope strategy. Because you say, yeah, you all got that, but it's always been minimal. I'm arguing with people on the voucher side, the quote conservatives on the voucher side. I get rankled when people start talking about educating kids on the cheap as the primary. Oh yeah, we for vouchers because it only costs $2,400 to educate a kid. I'm saying, wait a minute.
Yeah, stop.
Now, is your child in a school that's got an investment of $2,400 per kid? So in part, Bob, and people don't like to talk about this, the way the whole choice program was constructed, in my opinion, the compromises that had to be made for it to be constructed was in fact consigned to make it fail. And it's only been just tenacity almost that has kept it going. But when you look at the reality of some of these schools, all of the research aside, a lot of these schools need a lot of help.
Right.
And that's what we've been working on over the last year. But it's help both in terms of educational design, but it also has to be resources. And one of the reasons that to me you fight for in Edison, Edison in particular, who has, I think, a decent educational design, unless we get some of these decent educational designs in here,
Right.
this whole thing is going to collapse.
It's gonna die.
Right, because so so even when people say you had this program here and it hasn't had any impact, I would say yeah, because it's always been too small, it was underfunded, and to be frank, people in that school district could care less if 1,000 poor kids leave the system.
Because they can
That
See,
absorb
doesn't
that.
have to be-
what's the size of Milwaukee?
100,000.
See,
100,000
100,000 kids.
kids.
So, and this is what you got to look at size now. See, if Milwaukee would lose 5,000, no big deal. But if I lose 5,000 at 28,000, if I lose 2,000, see, we got to take this discussion to average size. If New York lost 5,000 kids. So what?
It's a
The sense of
it's a
see the critical.
Milwaukee's got
percentage of
but
the overall.
7,000 kids outside of the school system. It hasn't had any impact.
But the
on
sense
them.
of urgency
Yeah,
will
but see,
happen.
They're all the kids that they want to
chapter
leave.
220.
But
No, not
No,
the
you
kids they
mean the
want them to
220
leave.
No, but see what that is about. That's a quote public school choice thing, okay? And in fact, also you got a space problem. So that even if those
Okay.
6,000, you know, if tomorrow they ended 220 and we had 6,000 kids come back in here, where would they go?
But we got to take the discussion
Well,
the
you know, so it's-
to the
there are a lot of
smaller
elements.
markets. Say the markets between 20 and 60,000. Say like Ohio, because if we lose 5,000 kids, and you look at $4,000 per kid, and then you look at Chapter 1 and all that stuff, you're looking at 8, 10 million.
The issue is not whether you're
I'm
small or big.
Right.
The issue is the percentage. What is the critical percentage that you need to reach to have an impact? And if it's 15% of the kids, you could get 15% of the kids in Detroit.
But I'm saying they probably will never get to 15% of the kids in Detroit or Milwaukee as quickly if you get 2% or whatever the number you want to pick.
2% won't impact you either. You
and
have to get to the point where
1,000 kids
where you have
would
to
impact
reduce
me.
your budget and lay off some people.
1,000
Well, that's
kids.
the question I was gonna ask.
What-
What does impact mean? Once you've gone beyond the point of defining the range of percentages that would be necessary for this district or that
Most
district.
districts say if they have enough charter schools open in their community, like Lansing did, that they have to now reduce staff because a number of kids, losing one kid from a school classroom does not change
No,
the
that-
number of teachers that you need. You have to lose enough kids that now I need less teachers.
And that's the sense of
But
urgency.
what- Okay, then what?
That happened all during the 80s when budgets were cut, and ain't nobody changed nothing
But
at that point.
what's gonna
I mean,
change?
But that's what I'm telling you. I'm saying, no.
I think
What's
you are
gonna-
overstating the
no.
leverage issue.
But
That's
I'm
why
using.
I'm asking about, because I'm
I don't
really
think we ever
asking-
got.
I'm not-
I
I'm
don't
not,
think we
you
ever
know.
got, even in budget cuts, to the critical level. And then the comparison that's often made, and you can argue
Debbie
against
Boston laid
this.
off 800 teachers.
Right. And
800 teachers
it
out of
absorbed
5,000.
that change over
In
time.
what year?
See, because I don't know.
Back in the 80s.
I don't
But
know.
it's, I mean, I have a school district that they laid off, they have people laid off
But
that
no one
never
was paying
came back, but it
attention to it.
doesn't make.
There's more
don't-
attention on these issues.
But
now.
is the compelling reason for people to change a function of loss at whatever, margin? Or is it the other larger issue that this redesign is going to be seen by our customers as the way to go? Because I just think institutions like Jonah, they can just absorb this.
Right.
And they'll take it, it'll be a hit, but it won't change the way they think
But then what-
and the values that people have created over time to continue to,
Let's look at another industry. Look at the auto industry.
Mhm.
Why did the foreign auto industry eventually have an impact on the American auto industry? Why, when people stopped buying cars from the big three, they ignored them. They ignored them for about 20 years, and it had to get a certain percentage of their market had to leave before they said, "Oh my God, we got to start paying more attention to our customers
Here's where I
and
think,
redesign what we do."
but here's where I think the analogy breaks down. No, but
It's not the best way to learn, but if you have a monopoly, you don't have to learn.
But-
It has to hit
But
you
Debbie-
in the pocketbook.
We're not gonna
I
change
agree
because
conceptually,
it's
That's one strategy.
But I agree conceptually, but what I think is a difference in where the analogy breaks down, that was a discrete industry, and it hit the entire industry. We're talking K to 12 nationally here, and it's only going to hit portions of that from East Coast to West Coast. It's not going to be something pervasive throughout the K to 12 market.
It'll be pervasive where there are poor, low-income children who are
Right,
failing.
and what?
Right.
And therefore Jonah the whale will sit back and, just absorb that because it's not the whole industry. It's not the entire
But
K to
it's-
12.
but
It's going to be
56
received.
million
Yeah,
kids in this country?
but does it
Public
argue,
education?
does it argue for some type of real dual strategy? See, because.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to argue.
Right, see, because what I'm concerned about is the people like yourself, who I respect, and people in this room who I respect, that if you're sitting there saying, okay, I understand what you're doing, I'm gonna use what you're doing as a way to try to force the other part of this discussion.
Martin
to take
Malcolm.
place.
Yeah.
I mean, literally,
I know that.
I mean, which is cool with me because in the end, the objective isn't a particular tactic. The objective is to create an environment where our children can learn. I mean, that's the objective.
I know.
And if you got people who respect each other, who are operating on different parts of this thing, but we all understand collectively what it is we're trying to do, then do we create some possibilities that we do not now have? And I don't know. I mean, I'm posing that because what occurs when, particularly, black folks. I mean, I've had black people say to me, "Look, man, we just got in charge, and now you in here talking about, that you want to change this. Hell, we just got to be in charge." And
I turn.
right, and it was difficult for me to say to people, look, let me tell you something. Neocolonialism is as rough on our people as colonialism, and in fact,
If not rougher.
right, in some ways it's rough.
The mindset.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Because
That's right.
so I'm saying you're a good person, but you're a good person in a system that is dysfunctional. And the mere fact that you're black up in here, while I'm proud you're in here, right on, let's shake it, do this. I'm saying that.
There's a new way to do that.
Right, or whatever, you gotta go behind your head, whatever you gotta do. But
exactly.
in the end, our kids still ain't learning.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we address that? And see, I'm interested in having this type of conversation expanded. Like we bring in a group of people together in October, black people, to talk about how do we use vouchers, charters, whatever it is, innovations inside the existing system. What are all these different things that are happening out here? How do we as a people try to use these to make sure that our kids learn? And so what I'm interested in doing is having some people there, like you are there, along with others who are rising up out there now saying, parents who are out there talking about charters, charter school operators. I mean, we got a lot of black people out there who are in this milieu that need to also be having a discussion with some of you in this room, even though there's a small number of people like you who can even have the discussion.
Right.
But how do
Because
we do
originally, he left this out, we only extended the invitation to people who currently can embrace vouchers, charters,
Right.
homeschooling, whatever it takes to educate children. Because this was not going to be a debate about which ones you should do and which ones you shouldn't do.
Right, it was going to be a discussion about how do you use
You're gonna reframe the question to
Yeah.
how do you use
How do
it?
you
How do we use it?
That's what I'm
to
saying.
improve
As
That's
the
opposed to
system? This is not the debate on whether we should be
There, so how do we
engaged.
use it to our advantage to,
I
and that's the question should be asked.
Being the Martin in this room, the issue still is those people who've got, those 47 people in the Council of Great City Schools, not all of them being black, of course, who have got the kids and have got some clout, and whether or not they ought to be at the table to at least tell you their fears.
Right, but I agree, but I'm talking about even a 2 or 3 stage process. One is that the people who are out there arguing about these things need to get a greater clarity of vision about what this is, how it could be used, what some of the pros and cons are. And then we do need to have this discussion with the people that you're talking about, but maybe there's even a second one, Bob, and that is with people like you who may be open to these but have very, real questions that are not coming out of absolutely not, I'm standing by the door.
Ideologically opposed.
No, but saying, look, what about this, what about that? You see what I'm saying? Because maybe we gotta have that discussion first before we go marching up into the room,
With the council.
with the council. If that's ever even possible.
Are you gonna look at something more than some concurrence around the design or delivery? Are you gonna be able to show the difference that it has made in the lives of children in certain?
But see, in the final announcement, that to me is what you ultimately gotta show for any of this.
No, but is that part of the agenda for the fall?
No, because the fact is, we don't have enough information yet to be able to draw conclusions about any of it. One of the arguments is going to be, at least in my mind, is how do you set up accountability systems to actually make sure that children are benefiting by these things?
See, without that, there's got to be sufficient doubt. It's the pig in the poke thing that Bob raised earlier. Not that I believe it's a pig in the poke, but to get into the heart of people's thinking and to get them to move
Right.
out of the box to even engage in a conversation about this, they're gonna raise that. Not that they're raising it about what innovations they've been using over the years, but they're gonna raise that because
Well,
of.
charters haven't really been around long enough.
I know.
But to give you an example, the voucher system in Milwaukee has, and it doesn't matter that the studies that say, yes, the kids are performing better, the people who support it say, yeah, this is the right study.
And
The
on the
people
other
who
side-
don't support it will always say, no, you should really be looking at this other study over here which proves that there's no difference. So on the one hand, you need the data, but the data is not going to be the thing that persuades the establishment to change. But when you but if you go back to who should be making the decision, the people who run the current system or give parents the money and let them choose. And if enough parents choose to get something else for their kids, that's how you keep getting back to, you can either give the money to the parents and let them make the choice. And if they're happy, they will stay. And as you said, maybe the parents in the 5 schools that you picked would not leave and they would still stay, but the parents in some schools in Toledo would leave.
See, I think people are driven on success, whether they're parents in Dayton or parents here in Milwaukee. They want to know, if we're going to go down this road, is it going to be better for my kid? I think it's a fundamental question, and I think data will be necessary as part.
Oh, no,
No, we're
there's
not
no
saying that, but
disagreement
we're
on
saying
that,
it,
Cliff.
we're absolutely agreeing with you. But we're saying the parents, for example now, if your state just passed charter legislation, I'll use Washington as an example. Washington is opening its 2nd year of charter schools. There is no data on charter schools in Washington. If charters in Washington have waiting lists, it's because parents are basically not happy
Right.
with
They're fed
where
up.
their kids
They're fed up.
currently are, and their position is it can't be any worse than what they have.
You say
Now,
we catch it
it very well may be, but that's why now 5 years out, 6 years out, parents are going to be making choices among the charter schools based on the data that's available on those schools.
Another piece, I think, to try to bring our peers along, say, looking at vouchers, I think we should be concerned why children are leaving our schools to go into a voucher program. I think that should be, some research should be done in questioning parents and teachers and students on why they're leaving. Then that will raise the discussion to another level.
We have that information.
Yeah.
About the schools. But the principals and the superintendents must buy into and want that information.
Right.
Yeah,
And
so
they
that's
But
the
only-
James,
thing.
but
And
James,
they
I
only-
want to go back to.
Do they want that information?
Yeah. I want to go back to what Cliff raised, which I thought was an excellent point. And I don't know how to do it, and we should think about it. But it would be a way to really ask people like you or Cliff, who have changed their views, or Dr. Deborah McGriff. What? No, but really, what was
in the Head Start program.
Right. What was the process that you went through or are currently going through that allow you to move your thinking? You know what I'm saying? Because we do have to think
Gotta
about
capture that. That's very
I
important.
mean, because was it a series of discussions? Was it discussions plus what you saw happen in your district? Was it the frustration? I mean, it's got to be something, a combination of things, you know, that led to that.
But I would say, with me, because I've watched the charter school movement from day one, and have followed it because I wanted the information to make sure I could justify my position against charter schools. I wanted the information. But then I started the discussion with Howard, more or less, about charter schools, and Michael Fox, who was a representative in Ohio at the time. And I started getting information about it. And I started looking at reconstitution of schools, what Bill Rojas was doing out in San Francisco. And when Ohio passed the law in Ohio dealing with charter schools, they wrote the law specifically for the 8 large school districts.
Right.
8 large school districts startup charters and said conversion schools in the other school districts. So I questioned that because I felt this was a great time to look at charter schools, reconstitute schools, and try to improve K-12 education in the Dayton community. Plus, I'm sick and tired of being on the bottom. I'm sick and tired of being on the bottom, and every time you pick up the newspaper, we are being kicked in the rear end about issues. And where in Dayton, money is not an issue. We need some money to build some new schools, but money is not an issue as far as the instructional piece and the training and all of that other stuff. So I said to my board, this is a good chance for us to really do some things here in Dayton using the charter school language, because now we have the language in Ohio. Now I started talking to Edison way before the language was even passed in Ohio. I talked to Deborah 3 years ago because the structure of the Edison academic piece, I think it's great stuff there. But then in Dayton, I felt people always talk about it takes the village. I thought we had put together the village. You know, we had our higher education at the table, the business community at the table, K-12 education, and was trying to bring the union. I think that would have been powerful to work together to make sure that the 5 schools in Dayton would be successful in working with a private company. So you have all the players there. So that's how I moved to this agenda. Now, the voucher piece, vouchers in Dayton, Chester Finn and I said, well, I'm not going to fight vouchers. How can I use vouchers to help improve the school system? Chester, I want to be at the table to make sure you select the right students based on your criteria. So then let's evaluate this and see best practices that we can use. We have charter, we have vouchers, we have K-12 traditional. And that's how I got to this point. And I think we should bring it inside and not stand on the outside and keep throwing rocks in the window.
The problem for me is still the inequity of the way that the voucher programs have been kicked out, and the inequity between the fact that they'll pass charter legislation, not reconstitution legislation. So when you keep going back to where most of the kids are, nobody will give you the tools to do the job.
Right, the total,
But they'll give you tomorrow 15 schools. You know, now, and let's not do Edison. Let's do the Cliff Janey Charter School. Now, Cliff and a bunch of parents got together and opened up a charter school. And it's based on what? I don't know what. They can get that. You say, I got 5 bad schools, I want to reconstitute them. Nope.
And see, I think that's
right.
That's why I've always fought for both. Because I've always believed it does us no good to have a couple little boutique schools, if I can use that language. But it has no impact on the current system, nor do you wage any struggle one way or another to give people inside the system tools to make changes, right? So it seems to me that in some way you have to talk about how do you have both of those conversations concurrent.
And if people are not willing to give any superintendent, and I couldn't get it and you couldn't get it, the right to reconstitute failing schools,
Not only that, the
it's
Supreme Court took it away, right?
Yeah, but again, it's an injunction. It's a local court, so it's still going through the.
Right.
And in fact, what that article you read this morning is about, Bob, is that they were trying to pass separate legislation because the union fought the closing failing schools on the basis of it was a part of a budget bill.
Yeah, I know.
And it's unconstitutional to have a local bill as a part of a budget bill. So they were trying to pass a separate bill to remove that impediment.
Well, I think that the environment and talking about the redesign of schools has to address the people who are struggling with charters, much less vouchers, has to address all those types of inequities in a plan that would be put forward. The fact that Milwaukee, Wisconsin only happens to Class A cities. And how many Class A cities are there? One.
It's hard to count that far, huh?
And the lack of reconstitution, the fact that you're not addressing the teachers' unions, teacher union issues. I mean, there's a plethora of things that if people could be given some tools and some relief, that I think would really lower this.
But if they wanted to fight for those things, the people who support vouchers and charters would be there to support them.
Deborah, 6, 7 years ago, when the representatives from your company came to Harvard to talk about the Edison project, I asked them, why not use the leverage you have to, every time you get a school in a city, insist that the state or the city itself free up a school to reinvent itself. They, nope. You've got leverage. You want to talk about leverage? Edison's got leverage. These other institutions and private companies that are starting up charter schools have leverage. Y'all got to use that leverage too on public education more than opening up schools. So part of that.
Although I think they have less leverage than you think. I agree with you though.
There's no reason, if this is really going to be a public-private partnership in the largest sense, then the leverage has to come from everybody.
But the part of the leverage part of that issue that's missing, Edison is willing to say, if we don't improve student achievement, you can fire us, our school doesn't exist. The people who want to be freed up in the public sector have to also be willing to say the same thing. What you get is that you want a school that wants total freedom, but nobody wants to be held accountable when the bottom line is, are kids learning in this school? If the answer is no, your school closes. That's how far, no, we don't want that much freedom. We still can't be responsible for these kids. So you got to go all the way.
Let's go. I don't think.
But somebody got to bring the discussion to the table and because getting back to Dayton, on many days I was out there by myself. No one, even my business leader, they didn't want to come out. They wanted this to happen. But let's see where you're going with this now. And no one from the external community came in there. That no legislators even took a position to try to assist in moving this.
It was the same when we came here. I mean, we came from a choice background. Mm-hmm. You know, the only thing I can say is every time we introduce something more radical, these guys would out-radical us. You know,
that's our stuff. Well, that's what you got to get in your community.
Nobody in the district would talk about choice. We come in here choicing our, what's off, and then, no, they ain't gonna get it. We want some more. You know, it's like. Okay, and it is lonely.
And then the newspaper came out, well, James Williams cannot lead this change. He needs to rally us, and some more people need to step out there.
The board's suspicious, the community's suspicious. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's a lonely place.
It's, which I didn't mind.
Well, I think this is a rich discussion, but I think in the interest of time and where we are in our mental capacity, we need to try to move us. And so I would like us to touch a little bit on what advice we would give to a prospective superintendent. Are there any specific kinds of things that either of you all would say to anyone who's thinking about becoming a superintendent? In the light of all of this discussion, that we've had.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that we've mentioned already. One earlier we were talking about this notion of being willing to move, to be mobile, to go to different communities, to find the right match between you and the board and the educational goals of that community. I think it's extremely important who you follow, who your predecessor was, because that is going to shape a great deal the educational environment and philosophy and expectations. And so if you're following a superintendent who is closely aligned with where you are, you save a lot of time. You don't have a lot of stuff. You have more things that you can continue and embellish and enrich than you will spend a lot of time thinking, I got a lot of stuff that I want to get rid of, and will help you. And Bob had mentioned earlier this notion of being a risk taker, getting yourself involved in new reforms, being aware of new reforms, participating, and then a commitment to keeping to self-development as a continuous process in whatever way you want to do that. But I remember when I was in my I'm looking stage, I used to read the ads in the New York Times every Sunday, because I was looking for what are school districts saying they want, the kinds of qualities that they're looking for in their superintendents, or the type of experiences that they want, and trying to do a self-assessment of how close am I to this or that, and where are the places where I need to enhance my own skills, and what are the types of professional opportunities I need to engage in. And then I think it is important to write and develop some growth plan for yourself. You're more likely to be committed to something that you take some time to sit and write and develop, and then to review periodically to say where am I really doing a good job, where are the places in my plan where I've given little or any attention, and then setting additional short-range goals.
Debbie, would there be anything in specific, though, you would say to prospective women superintendent, given your experience?
I think you get grounded. I did. I read a lot about the success of other women superintendents, but not to limit your reading to women in education, but to read about women in non-traditional fields, what they go through, how they cope, women who lead major organizations. Because I found that trying to analyze and to have those experiences vicariously made the gender issue less of an issue, more of a everybody goes through this, and here are a whole group of people who survived it, and you can survive it too. And plus you learn a number of strategies for dealing with the unwelcome responses, the challenges to your authority, not being afraid to say as a superintendent, I'm going to balance my cabinet, and I'm going to give other women an opportunity to be promoted, especially when you look around and your cabinet is clear that that not a lot of them got promoted under previous administrations. I would caution women that your mentors don't only have to be women. And I haven't talked about Floretta or other women that did influence me, but you can have both male and female mentors, and you can learn a great deal from both. So it might be nice to have a female mentor, but you can also learn a lot from men who hold a position. Men who are not threatened by women, men who don't see you as, some people see their assistants as only doing certain things. And you need to work with men who are not sexist. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And that are very secure themselves in helping you develop. I mean, it's probably difficult to have someone work for you, then the person who's working for you wants not your job, but the position you're in. And to still feel comfortable in helping to groom that person for that position. And if you're lucky enough to work for someone who can do that, I would never work for anybody that I didn't respect. That's the first thing. If you can't learn from the person and you don't respect them, then you should not be working in that organization.
I'm gonna give the advice that my students give one another when they go through the program and then get these jobs, which is know thyself. I mean, if you are not reasonably well grounded in who you are and what you believe in and the kind of life you live, and got your family stuff fairly squared away, and if it's your religious life fairly squared away, I mean, whatever you've got that grounds you, you need to make sure that that's there and working, and because you're going to have to count on it a great deal. We talked a lot about principles, PLES, today, and I think people need to spend a lot of time thinking about what it is that they believe in, what it is that they're willing to do to make those beliefs come true. The issues of courage and integrity we talked about today are extremely important. I'm not going to talk about the skills. We talked about skills a lot today, but I think if you're not reasonably well grounded and you have a set of beliefs about what you want to do, have some ability to deliver on that, and really want to do this work, if you don't have all that, you're going to be very unhappy. If you go into this for the wrong reasons, for power, money, you're going to be very, very unhappy person. I don't know what it is that grounds people. For me, it's very deeply family and friends. I mean, you know, I've got a great wife, and she puts up with this stuff, and you know, I didn't have to worry about that a whole lot. You know, I worked with colleagues who I knew had my back. Nothing was going to happen, and we could have some fun, you know, also. But if you don't know what you're about, you get lost here in this, and you won't find yourself coming out the other end. And that knowledge of thyself then enables you to make that match with the district, with other people, and to be a reasonably successful and happy superintendent.
I would say, you know, first of all, this is a great profession, a great position. It's not, it's a tough job, but there are a lot of positive things. I think this is the best time to be in education because what will happen over the next 2 or 3 years is going to impact this country for the next 30 or 40 years, just like in the 60s. And I think I'm happy to be a part of this change that's coming. And I think people should think about that if they're coming into this profession. The principles part that you mentioned, Bob, is so important because I would not encourage anyone to negotiate their principles to get a job. Mm-hmm. Do not do that, period. And you're going to have to be courageous. It's a very lonesome job. I think the sense of family is very important. You need somebody when you go home after the job and talk to and share some of the frustrations and some of the successes with. And I would encourage people to read. The research and understanding what is happening is very important because you have to understand that this is not something new that's happening. It's happened many, many years ago. It's just coming at a different form or structure. Like someone once said, the questions are the same as they were 30, 40 years ago, but the answers must be different. And I would just encourage people to, if they come in this profession, to come in with a sense of security and come in because you want to help children.
I'll just add a couple of quick things. I always tell folks and superintendents prepare, but they need to think about having a sense of functional arrogance as a superintendent. And when the challenges come before them and the traps are laid before them, the newspaper article comes out, you are going to be, in many situations, the one people will look up to see what road you've chosen to travel on, what height that road is on. Is it high, medium, or low? And a functional sense of arrogance gives you a way to overcome and to still ride the wave above the fray that's going to be there. And I think it's something that people can acquire through mentoring. And I think some people have a certain kind of arrogance that's not functional.
It's not dysfunctional.
It's dysfunctional arrogance, and it gets in the way. But functional arrogance, and I'm beginning to think a lot more about this, and I'm going to try to write about it a little bit. I think it's an important concept and principle for people to have and embrace and guide them through a lot of stuff that's going to be there. The other thing that's most important and has been most important for me is the part of the work that Ron Heifetz talks about in terms of issues that come before a leader and issues that are right but are not ripe for you. That we can't take on these issues that are not ripe for you to be the mover behind it, even though you believe it's the right issue. Clinton, gays in the military, first time around, took that on. Issue wasn't ripe, hadn't been seeded properly. But if it's an issue you believe in that's right, you then have an opportunity as a leader to get it ripened through others, so that you're not necessarily out there because the issue isn't right, or you've got so much focused stuff on your plate, you need to stay focused, others need to be cultivated to step up. I think prospective superintendents need to know that early on, because the expectation is lumping and downloading on your plate all kinds of stuff, and folks have to have this level of discrimination about your force field and what's out there and what's most important, but not lose sight of an issue that's right field but not right, because you need to move within the community and get that seated, because you've got a real win there, because you're building capacity, for the entire community and for the district. So I just want to offer those two, and I agree with the others that were mentioned.
Can I add one more and see if you
Yeah.
agree to it? No, when you'll walk away, and what would make you walk away,
Right.
so that you don't have to ever compromise your principles.
Good, that's good.
Yeah, I was gonna take us into the next one, which is can there be life after the superintendency? And what I was gonna say is, build on what Debbie just said. I think you can stay 1 year too long and leave 1 year too soon. And I think the judgment about that is real critical, particularly if you want to talk about what is your life going to be like after the superintendency. And I think we all have friends, and one in particular I'm thinking about, who I would argue to this day stayed 1 year too long. Because I think the idea is to do the best that you can do for kids. But there comes a point where you really have to assess, can I any longer be effective? And do you leave when people still want you, versus do you leave when people are like at the door saying, get the hell out of here? And you all know that when I resigned, I used that term about death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, and it really does get to that point at some juncture. And so how you assess that, I agree with Debbie. And what would make you make those decisions? But the reason why I connected the two is that because I think that particularly as African American superintendents, and maybe there are examples out there that I don't know about. I mean, clearly there are, there's Floretta. I mean, there's a lot of examples where people really were able to transition into another place that was really meaningful for them, and also allowed them to continue to be involved in the whole thing of how do you help kids. And it seems to me that that's one of the things that we need to talk about. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that how you leave the superintendency, I think, affects your ability to do that.
When about a month after I made the decision to leave Milwaukee, I happened to be on a trip of the Children's Defense Fund, having a conversation with the Reverend Jim Forbes from Riverside Church in New York, and as these two know, I mean, even though I'm very happy where I am, I agonized a great deal over leaving the school system, because we put a significant amount of effort into it, and I was questioning whether or not I made the right decision. All those second thoughts that you have. And Jim said, has your mission changed? I said, what are you talking about, my mission changed? I said, well, what did you start out to do in education? And I said, well, I was outraged by the injustices perpetuated upon mostly black and poor kids. And he said, well, what are you going to Harvard for? I said, well, I want to train superintendents, and then I got it.
Yeah.
I want to train superintendents so they can go out and I can have a bigger impact. But the mission is still, as Rudy Cruz says, that girl in 3rd grade in that school in the Bronx. How are we going to get down to there? And this reminded me of how I thought about accepting the Harvard piece, which was it enabled me to do that work in a different way. And it also enabled me, given the fact of the schedule of the university faculty, allowed me to keep my hand in districts and working and helping other superintendents who were struggling with this issue in ways that they might not usually have that kind of help. Bringing in the research, bringing in other pieces. And in the end, I guess I was okay. Well, my thinking of leaving was highly dependent upon her getting the job, because I left a year too early. in many ways. If you hadn't taken over, God only knows what would have happened to the school district, you know, in the ensuing 4, 5, 6 years. So a lot of that was not realizing that the board could be dumb enough not to understand the agenda that they had gone through, and would be to continue that. But I think there certainly is life after the superintendency, and it allows you to continue to do the work that you've always done in very meaningful ways. I mean, I feel useful, and that's what I wanted to feel as a teacher. I wanted to feel as a superintendent, that I actually had put something back on the table, as some people had put stuff on the table for me as a child. You know, little black Bob Peterkin in the 3rd grade in Queens, somebody put something on the table there, and so, you know, Harvard still enables me to do that in ways that Loretta gets to do with Superintendents Prepared, and gets to do with her search practice, and positioning people to take over the leadership in these cities.
It's amazing that your sense of center and calm happened from the same question that I asked myself, because I was never in it to be in a certain place. That the mission always was to create excellent schools, and when I got that, the mission in Detroit was to create an excellent district. And so in coming to Edison, nothing changed. I went to a company that was about creating world-class schools and creating a national network of schools. So to me, it's just your same work in another place.
But how often, this is a question to the 3 of you, ex-superintendents, when do you know, what is the signal when it's time to go?
Well,
You said a year or two, you can give
Yeah,
a year or two?
I can tell you what
And
my,
I care that from each one, you know.
I'll tell you what my signal was. It really was, even though I remember Bob, a comment Bob made earlier today about, you know, you didn't spend your time counting. But when I really thought I was at the point where I was going to have to spend all of my time counting, I knew that. I knew, because if you got to spend all your time counting, then several things happen in the school district. Number one, the people smell blood.
Right.
Because if you come in there talking about you're going to be aggressive anyway, you got these people who are hanging close to the wall, as they said, you know, this too shall pass. Just, you know, and when you finally start reaching them, and people know, oh, hell, well, maybe I do have to respond to what this person is talking about. If they get a sense that you can't move your agenda, at least at the policy level, they smell blood inside that district, it's all over for you. You're standing up there talking, but the reality is they ain't listening because they don't think they have to listen anymore. And my perception was that was based almost purely on what is his relationship with the people that he works for. Because the union is sitting out there knowing that no matter what he says, we think we can get 5 votes to turn key things around that he wants to do. And so for my thinking, that was one part of it. Another part of it, quite honestly, man, was I tried to view myself as a change agent, you know, as a person who wanted to make change, who wanted to make reform. And what I felt was that if I stayed one more year, I was going to have to be explaining away all kinds of stuff that I simply couldn't get done. And before you know it, you're no longer viewed as a person who's trying to make change. You now are a defender, because you're in there defending stuff and stuff that you don't even believe in, that you know ain't right, but you're in there trying to explain it and this and that. And once that occurs to you, this is at least my opinion, your capacity to get out and carry out your mission, at least as you perceive it, gets diminished considerably. And Debbie and I talked a lot about that. And plus, to be honest with you, it had gotten to a point, man, where it was beginning to rip away not only at my soul, but to rip away at me physically. And people who cared about me could see it, even though I couldn't see it. And I really didn't understand how much this stuff took out of me until I stepped out of it for about 2 or 3 months and you know,
gain the 10 pounds you lost.
Right, and then you start really understanding, man, what it was doing, you know, to you internally. And I know, and you all know superintendents who do, I think, stay in there a year or 2 years too long, and by the time they come out limping, they come out beaten down, they come out with a loss of their reputation. I mean, all of this stuff. And I mean, those were kind of some of the things that I was thinking about.
I knew when the board president came to talk to me about signing a long-term contract, and I didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to do it. It was she wanted to do it to put rumors to rest about whether or not we were going to continue the agenda, and talk to me about, I don't remember what it was, 5 years, whatever was the maximum.
It was 5.
And I went home and I realized, I don't want to do this for another 5 years here. And it probably would have been better if we'd structured the contract with a rollover year, because I could have envisioned myself 2 more years, and Harvard was prepared to wait until to keep an interim in until I got ready. But I just didn't want to do it. And my wife said she knew it was. I did spend a lot of time trying to make policy out of shit for these people, just because they had no sense of making policy or how to do it in the main. And she said one night on television, we had been asked to do something to realign the athletics, where the kids were going to play basketball, and I'd have to go to the Wisconsin Athletic Association and sell my soul to a bunch of crazy people and do a bunch of stuff so we could get our kids back in the city. And the day I brought it to the board, they said, "What are we doing this for?" And we said, she looked up at the screen and my head was like this. She said, I argued for 2 or 3 minutes to try to make them understand what they were doing, and Jeanette Mitchell, the president, said, Dr. Peterkin, do you have anything left to say? And I tried to get the energy up one more time to say, but listen. And she said, I just went, no.
Time to go.
Time to go.
Incidentally, we did get the realignment.
Okay.
It took 2 ex-jocks who had gone through the city conference to come in and do that, but it was strange.
In Cambridge, it was realizing that I didn't want to work for that board anymore. I didn't want to work for the mayor who'd been elected. I just didn't want to work for them. They had sapped all my goodwill later. And then I was in the middle of, what do we have left in our contract? 2 years? 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, that one was a short one.
Bye.
I was in the second year, starting the last year of my contract, when Edison fell into my life.
Right.
And I was thinking about, do you stay with, in Detroit? You're going to start negotiations. And then I had in the back of my mind, I have brought in a number of people from outside the system, non-educators, to do the business functions. And I knew that I needed to make a decision 6 months before the end of my contract, so that it takes somebody an average 6 months to find a job, so that I felt that I had done right by them. They have 6 months to find a job before their contract runs out. And Edison offered me a position, and offered it to me in such a professional way, and back to this contract negotiation. And I'm sitting here going, do I accept this with no animosity, no conflict, or do I stay around and try to negotiate another, remembering my initial negotiation? And even then I had a superintendent, I had a team of people who wanted me and loved me. Now I'm negotiating with someone who I wouldn't say wanted me nor loved me. And it was like very difficult to bring yourself to say, why would I send myself through that? And I was also looking at Edison as an opportunity that was cutting edge, that was going to happen. And I felt that there needed to be somebody of color who participated in it, that if it was going to be as good as they claim it was going to be, and they could raise this money, I wanted to make sure that someone was there to make sure that in communities of color, that we reached out to them and they had an opportunity to participate. And it was not a hard decision to make. When I compared this against that, And then and my daughter was also the deciding factor. We talked about it, and then she's very good, and she's always listened to me.
I thought I was.
Exactly. You gave me lots of other things. But what she said, your reasons were all educational, and I think I could.
And
they
ultimately
confirmed.
suspicious, I might add.
They confirmed some of the things but my daughter has been in the private sector always, and she said to me, you know, back to this thing about people changing careers a number of times now, and you've worked for a nonprofit, you've worked in the public sector, you've never worked in the private sector. You should just, if you don't like it, you can always leave, but you should at least experience it, and it keeps you in the field that you're in. And that was sort of the deciding thing. Everything just seemed right, and once again, it seemed like the right time to leave Detroit as well.
I just ask one question, and it doesn't have to go all the way around to each of you, but I would argue that you three are not the norm of African American superintendents who left with dignity and left with credibility. Whether you think you left maybe a year, you know, too early or not.
No, I think I didn't.
Bob said he
did.
did.
I think he left right on time.
Who-
As soon as that board was elected.
Yeah,
that was
I would
time
have to
for
say
him
that
go.
I'm gonna take back that. I forgot about the election of your board.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens in the thinking of those African American superintendents who stay too long and think of it less as a mission and more as a job, and as well try to play out an argument on the table of fairness? That is, you did me wrong, and that's unfair, and create. Well, Bob, we've seen it, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I
a
think
phenomenon that it's almost like folks shut down. That they're not scanning their environment at all, and
It's a confusion of the job with the self. I mean, I went to this NAPSI presentation. I was part of it with several people on resignation with dignity.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
1991.
Well, and you know, a bunch of us had left, and a bunch of us had come, and I realized I was sitting there that several people really did have the job confused with their sense of themselves.
You were bitter.
And so they had something to prove. You were going to pay me, you were going to, because I deserved to have this job. Well, the fact of the matter is, they can come in on any Tuesday or Wednesday night and fire you. Now they may owe you some money or whatever, but
Right.
there's no fairness concept when you work at our level. I mean, that's the deal. You wish it would be fair, and if it is, that's fine. I guess the other one that I witness is the people who then have to go get another superintendency to prove that they shouldn't have been
fired in the first
fired in the first place. And so they were unhappy where they were, and now they're unhappy in a new place.
Right.
And you know, I think the issue, you know, Debbie was very firm about this when she left Detroit. I'm not going to be a superintendent again. I've been there. I've done that. I didn't know whether I was going to be, but I'm glad. And I think it has something to do with thinking that you have an outlet. And I really want prospective superintendents to understand that you do have other outlets. You do have career choices. You can change. I mean, we've seen our colleagues now going into the private. You know, Debbie's one of the first. You see people flooding into the private sector now out of the superintendencies. And so there are opportunities to continue the work or to make money or whatever is going to make you happy that maybe we didn't have when we thought about our careers as being a superintendent from the time you were 30 to the time that you were 65. I never saw myself as being a superintendent for 20 years. So there may be a desperation factor in that, oh my God, I'm not a superintendent, I'm not making $100,000, $150,000 a year. You could go do something else that's as lucrative financially and as rewarding professionally.
I think, Cliff, I would say, man, I think the superintendent position is seductive. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, and it is some of the, it's not just the positive aspects, but there's only one of them
Right.
in whatever place you're in. There's a certain amount of status and everything that really goes along with that. But also for some of us, we actually have bought into the notion that we have much more power than we think we have. And so that if you go somewhere else, you like all of a sudden sense that you're no longer exercising that or have this power or this or that. I mean, I think a lot of different things impact on why, you know, why people would stay. I think speaking for myself, one of the things that I'm blessed to be able to do is that I'm out here actually creating something from scratch. I mean, you know, we've talked about, you know, what I did to create the Institute. And so I'm not sure how many of us have had that opportunity, but I've found that to be a very exhilarating entity. But I've created institutions from scratch before, going back to Malcolm X Liberation University, going back to community organizations. So for me, it wasn't a problem. It's a challenge. And with Debbie's help, you know, and initial thinking and some other people, we really saw a way to create something that would allow the mission to continue. But if you don't have a sense, maybe, of can you do that, or where can you do that, or where do you go, maybe it keeps you in there, because it is frightening.
It's frightening.
Right. I mean, to
Absolutely.
step out.
Paralyzing in a way. I just, in lots of ways, I figured here was an institution that was going to let me pick my students, design my courses, and run it the way that I felt it should be run. I mean, what's the downside of that? There's a certain, along with the seduction of the superintendency, the post-superintendency is somewhat liberating in a way, because now you literally can pretty much say whatever you damn well, especially if you're Howard whatever you damn well please from your perch, and you may get some audience to listen.
I think there's one other piece, and I agree with everything that Bob and Howard said, but I think some people are actually in denial, or they think they can size up the situation and know, and should anybody else looking at it would come to the conclusion that you need to walk away from this. Like Howard's new board that got elected against his agenda doesn't want to do what he's going to do, but he can decide, I can work with them, I can persuade them, I can get the 5th vote. And if you have that mentality, you will stay. And maybe for people who can make it through lots of different boards, and I don't think it is always that they got more committed to the job. They just might be better able to deal with the political side of the job and willing to put more energy into that than someone else would want to, than I would want to put into it. I just want to have my votes there, we talk, we work it out, and I'm not going to have to come in a room knowing that I got 4 people in the room that just doesn't want to be even close to where I want to be educationally. I just don't think I can go to work every day with that kind of environment. I think it's too draining to work in that kind of environment. And part of what I always wanted to do is work with people who have the same vision that I have about the big picture, and we can argue over strategy and the smallest stuff, but we can't be arguing over basic philosophical principles. And when we get to that point, it's time to move on. I don't care where you are.
I'm reminded of what I opened with in that resignation with dignity issue, is that you can't lose what you never had. I mean, if you gave up your dignity, and I think a lot of people do this up front in getting a job, right? You can't lose it some more down the road, and the board, boards smell blood too. I mean, and you smell blood at the beginning of your superintendency.
Right.
They're gonna feast on you all the way, all the way through, and.
I think some people go through the thing though too, Cliff, about, is it a betrayal? Because people will still say to me today, you should have stayed, man, because people needed you and this and that. And one thing I had to come to grips with is that people may need me, but if I can't be effective,
right,
I mean, you're fooling yourself. I mean, I got to stay because they need me, but you're staying and you're not moving an agenda.
Need you for what?
Right. So therefore, what?
Or on that one, I used to say to him, you needed them to elect a board that would help you do your job. and they didn't mobilize people to do that. So why should you feel guilty because you've decided you can't work with this board? Or when you wanted to build schools for people, they weren't there to pass that bond issue so that you could get kids out of closets. At some point, you cannot let people put a guilt trip on you, and you're going to be helping kids and contributing to their education by creating this institute. So it's not that, don't let someone else define for you
It's know thyself
how-
again. I mean,
how you should contribute to your community.
I mean, if you're not, once again, if you're not grounded, I mean, people, it'll kill you. It'll kill you. And if you really are all wrapped up in that you're the only person that can do this job, I mean, you know that. I'm the only person who can say to Milwaukee Public Schools, watch this, Bob.
Right.
You're fired, Howard's hired. You know,
Right.
you resign, Howard's hired. We can find somebody to be the next superintendent.
Let's take a break here. Then what I'd like us to do, how much time do we have left?
It's about 40 minutes on this day.
Okay, I want to come back and maybe take 15 or 20 minutes to wrap up.
No, because he
When?
essentially telling.
Debbie, you had something you wanted to add to the last question that Cliff had asked before
No.
we broke?
No, I don't think so. Did I have something I wanted to ask? No, what I was asking you was for the last question, are we simply going to do the legacy piece?
Right.
What did you want your legacy to be as a superintendent? I don't know.
Well,
That's
we
the only
talked a
question
little
we
bit
haven't
about
done.
that,
Yeah,
earlier.
before.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess what I would like to
Can
do.
we get in like we in? We are
Right.
finished.
Well, let me just say this, and what I want to do is first of all, thank each of you for, taking this time out to come and sit down and talk about this. I would be interested in what you all would think would be some next steps, and whether or not you found this valuable, and if you did, sort of why, or what would you do differently the next time?
Well, first of all, say thank you.
Yeah.
For taking an idea and really developing it into reality, what we have here, and really educating all of us. I think all of us learned something today based on sharing information with each other. Definitely should be a next step with this process. And I think there are 3 or 4 things that I'm interested in personally. One is, life after the superintendency. I think personally I need some guidance to make that decision to move into another arena because there's no one else out there talking to us about this. No other superintendents are talking about it. And I have observed my peers, a lot of good friends that left the superintendency limping. And the scary part from my standpoint, you go to AASA and National School Board and various conferences and you run into them. And they're like second-class citizens. They're not in demand. And they're chasing something to sell or buy or whatever the case may be. I don't want to go out that way. I don't want to be in that arena. I think the next issue, I think we had a great discussion today that could go 2 or 3 different ways. One, the article piece, sharing with other peers. I think some great articles can come out of this. I think we've developed really 4 chapters that we probably could develop a book into this concept because the 4 points that we discuss, I think, could be with the right grad assistants working with us from Harvard and from Marquette. We could.
Our Jeannie, our Harvard grad, who's at Marquette.
Right.
we could really tighten this piece up, and I guess the biggest challenge would be the audio piece, the video piece at least, how to really package that into something of significance to the education community. I think we should continue this dialogue to try to bring more of our peers along in a different arena where we can sit down and talk to them, because I think the change is going to have to happen at our level, superintendents, as far as trying to collectively come together on a common agenda, which would influence public policy to do a lot of the things that we talked about today.
Bob, maybe, I'd ask you to think about the possibility of facilitating a discussion like what we were talking about, where you would, you know, bring some superintendents and ex-superintendents together, and whomever else you thought would be good to talk about this thing. Is there a way for people to work together across these ideological barriers? I mean, what would have to be the framework for that to be possible? You know, because you and I were having a sort of a, what I thought was kind of a discussion about, yeah, but this would have to be in place and that would have to be in place. I don't know if that's possible, but I just wanted to put that on the table to piggyback on something that you said.
Right. I think too, the issue
We could put
of
it
the
together.
pre-superintendency is important, and I don't know, and Bob could be helpful there in that the places where we try to be helpful, I don't know how to say this, where we try to be helpful to prospective superintendents, some sense of how close we were to the mark. Do they have a different set of questions that they think they need to know? And once you get the job, it may be another set of questions, but if you're in a pre-superintendency position, you have a list of things that you think you might be helpful for you as you move forward. And I'm wondering to what extent our conversation actually hit that mark. Because we're doing it with hindsight. And they have a different perspective because they're going through it right now. So I'd like to confirm some of that. The gap between what we think is there and what they're thinking should be there.
I just want to add one more piece, the think tank piece. I'm hoping that we could turn this into a think tank to really publish and get information out to the broad-based community, and stop allowing others to determine or write and publish what's good for minority kids. And I would love to just keep that think tank concept on the table.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
sitting here thinking that I used to have these conversations at the Joint Center, and then it seems to me like education just fell off their table. Now, maybe they just don't involve me anymore. I don't know, but you know, what happened? I mean, there was an arm that we could have used for lots of the pieces, James, you just mentioned, and it's kind of like, oh, well.
Right. What I would like to do is I would like to put together an intergenerational conversation like this. That, you know, given you've got these younger people who are going out to become superintendents, to sit down with some of us who are a little further along the line.
Us seniors?
Yeah, that, you know, and really, you know, have a conversation about how they see it, how we see it, you know, what we could learn from each other, you know, in that process.
I think this process we use today could be expanded as well to benefit other audiences in addition to prospective superintendents or sitting superintendents. I mean, I could see this process being used to focus on some critical and salient issues for members in the business community, you know, nationally, various parent, you know, organizations. I mean, and it doesn't just have to be us, of course, or those who were not able to make it today, but we could set up a dialogue and just look at different markets and, you know, have some appropriate materials to go along with it. So this kind of stuff is always out there. There's the Achieve group, Bob, and you know, what Bob Swartz is doing now, working with, you know, the governors and certain CEOs. I would like that, because I think, you know, the medium we use today would be received well, and I'm sure we could polish it up and would have to polish it up. The second thing, I think we ought to consider the proposition of the book. And I think that needs to be done. And, you know, the work that was started by Scott and others needs to be built upon now, because 20 years from now, 10 years from now, someone else should be looking at it from that context. And we need, I mean, if we're scholars, we need to keep this going. I mean, we need to keep the literature base rich from which people will learn. So I really strongly endorse the idea of doing something holistic like that, and then figuring out a way to roll it out so it doesn't, you know, have the kind of shelf life it might if we don't look at a way to properly engage people around that. And it's not for self-interest, but if you do something right, you need to, you know, make sure it's being used and thought of in a considerable way.
Okay.
Our anointed organizations are failing the development and sustenance of black superintendents. And I'm wondering whether or not whatever comes of our conversation and subsequent conversations could be used to help refocus them in a way that would serve larger groups of practicing superintendents. You know, I complained earlier about the NAPSI Superintendents Commission and the Minority Caucus of the AA. I mean, all of these organizations never really did anything for me when I was in the superintendency. They were not a place that I went to be nurtured at all. I mean, they were, you know, they were the worst kind of organizational memberships that, so I'm wondering whether there are lots of people out there. I run the superintendent seminar in the summer and participate in one for new superintendents, and the new superintendents one is heavily attended by new black superintendents. Woman from Minneapolis, Carol Johnson, went there, and they are, after every session I do, I mean, you can just, people just come down, because I give very practical information on how to go into the superintendency, what you need to do, how you need to do environmental scans and all that kind of entry stuff that we took out of Jensen's book. And so there's a crying need for those coming in to be properly supported and situated so they can be successful. It's not happening for them anywhere in these other places. So maybe that kind of dialogue would be advantageous, you know, to brand new superintendents also.
Okay, well, let me just say that as leaving here, the one thing that I will pledge to do is to get copies of what we have to you all, to at least give you a chance to look at it individually, and we need to decide, do we want to get back together collectively and look at it with somebody else that we think would be good, who could maybe help us put it together either in written form and or in video form. And so we need to, you know, maybe we can talk about that over dinner tonight, maybe the best way to proceed, and then what assignments, you know, I would have to facilitate that. If that would make sense.
So will a manuscript, will this be typed in the manuscript?
I'm saying that what I want us to agree to tonight is exactly what you want me to do with this. Do you want me to get it transcribed, you know?
Or just do the audio tapes?
Or all three or whatever, because then I gotta sort of talk about,
What that means.
yeah, right, in terms of the resources to do that, and also suggestions from people as to who might be. I mean, I know we have the capacity here to deal with the video part of it, you know, but the transcribing and someone who would listen to the transcription and begin to lay out like what could be the framework for a book, for example, that kind of stuff. So we can take a little time tonight at dinner to try to talk about that. That would be good.
Okay.
It's well worth the time to go to the balcony again. Take a look at the dance floor, whether or not it's the right kind of dance or the right kind of people on the floor. We don't get a chance to do that as often as we should.
You finally done something I suggested.
Well, the reason I'm in trouble today is because I done stuff you suggested.
Well, he said he'd work us till 5 o'clock, and that he did.
If we get together again, maybe.